completely worn out. And so they're both there, lying on their sides, trying to catch their breath, but Susan is still not giving up. And she manages to climb on Ed's back and put him in a chokehold. And she starts yelling at him, like, "Tell me who sent you! Tell me who sent you and I'll call an ambulance for you!" Because, he's hurt. This woman really said, "Call an ambulance, but not for me." Anyway, Ed doesn't say anything back to her. He only growls at her. And so Susan tightens her grip around his neck and she holds him there. And she doesn't let go until he stops moving completely. And Ed dies. And then Susan runs outside over to a neighbor's house, who then calls 911. And police show up and they're able to piece together that Ed is connected to her husband, Michael. And so, bam, they go and they arrest Michael. Here's his mugshot. Ugh, Jesus, dude. And ultimately, Michael takes a plea deal and he's sentenced to 10 years in prison. So this guy got amnesia and forgot who he was for 14 years. Now the guy's name is Jim, and Jim is 50 years old. He's a mailman living in New York State. But see, Jim has a problem. He's kind of clumsy. He's always falling and busting his ass. Like, bro really needs instructions on walking. And one day in 1971, it all starts to catch up to him. Because he's at home and it's a normal day and he goes to take the garbage out and he slips down the icy steps and boom, he hits his head on the pavement. A few days later, he's driving to work, and achoo, he suddenly starts sneezing like crazy, and he somehow loses control of his car, and bam, he crashes into a telephone pole, and he hits his head again. The next day, he goes to work, and he's trying to be chill at this point, like, okay, I just need to not trip on anything. But then, I guess because he had hit his head in the days before, he suddenly gets all dizzy and whoa, he falls down a flight of stairs and bam, he hits his head yet again. And luckily, for the next 10 days, Jim manages not to get into any accidents, which at this point, quite an achievement. But then, he's out driving, and he loses control of his car again, and kaboom, he crashes his car again, and pow, he hits his head. This time, he hits it so hard that it knocks him unconscious. And he's rushed to the hospital, and he spends 3 days there recovering with a cerebral concussion. And if that isn't bad enough, a few weeks later, he has his worst day yet. And this day changes his whole life. So it seems like a normal day, and he borrows his friend's station wagon. Probably because he just wrecked his other car twice. But he borrows the station wagon because he's got to drive and pick someone up from the airport. So he takes it out, and while he's driving, his wallet falls out of his pocket and into the floorboard. A few hours later, he returns the car to his friend, not realizing his wallet had fallen out. And his friend offers him a ride home, and Jim's like, "Nah, bro, I'll walk," because it's only 15 minutes away. Then, on his walk home, he starts getting this terrible headache. And this one's really bad, worse than he's ever had. It's so bad, he's not sure if he can make it home or not. Now, let's pause this story for a second. We'll get back to Jim. But first, we gotta talk about this woman, Anne. Anne is Jim's wife. Anne is also waiting on Jim to get home from borrowing that friend's station wagon. And so she's sitting there in her house, chilling, and she waits, and she waits, and she waits, but there's no sign of Jim. And around 2 a.m., she's still sitting there waiting, and he's still not home. And remember, this walk should have taken 15 minutes at most. And so Anne calls the police, and she officially reports him missing. Within the next day, everyone is looking for Jim. The police put out an APB looking for him. They start reaching out to his friends and relatives to see if anyone's seen him. They're checking bodies in the local morgue to see if he's one of them. But so far, they don't find anything. And poor Anne, she doesn't know what to do. Her longtime husband just suddenly vanished one night walking home. Was he kidnapped? Was he unalived? No one knows. And so several years pass, and still no one has heard anything, and there are no leads. And poor Anne now spends her time just living alone, hoping her husband will come home one day. and she takes odd jobs around town to try and pay the bills, and she works nights and weekends just to keep busy so that she doesn't have to think about Jim. And she doesn't move to a new place or anything. She keeps their phone number listed under his name, just in case anyone finds him and decides to call. And eventually, sadly, she officially has Jim declared dead, as there is no other explanation for where he might be. Until... Here's the thing about Jim. We know Jim is a klutz. We've seen him bust his skull several times in the same week. So here's what really happened to him on his walk home that night. So Jim is on his way home, and he's not feeling well, a huge headache. And suddenly, boom, he completely blacks out. And there's no record of what happens in this next part, but the speculation is this. After blacking out, he goes and he catches a local train from his town into Grand Central Station in New York City. And from there, he potentially catches another train or a bus, and he ends up in Pennsylvania, specifically in Philadelphia. And during all that, he is completely blacked out, he just doesn't remember. And so the next memory Jim has, he's suddenly standing in downtown Philadelphia, a city he's never been to before. And he doesn't remember his full name, he doesn't remember where he's from or how he got there, or anything about his past. The only thing he can remember is that his first name is Jim. And to make it worse, he doesn't have his wallet on him because it fell out in his friend's station wagon, so he can't just look at his license and identify himself. And so I guess he just doesn't think to go to the police or hospital, and he's just oh, I guess I'll just start a whole new life. And he goes to the local offices of the Social Security Administration, and he gets a Social Security card with a fake name he just gave himself. And normally you'd need a birth certificate to get a Social Security card, but it's the 70s, so I guess everyone's F it. So he gets a card and he uses that as his ID, and he's able to get a job at a local cafe. And from here, he starts to rebuild his life. He gets several more jobs after that, ending up as a cook at a diner. He joins a nearby church. He makes a whole new circle of friends. Every winter season, he grows out this big white beard and he volunteers as Santa Claus at some of the local orphanages. Bro is just trying to live a normal life, I guess. And 14 years go by since Jim went first missing, and he's 64 years old now, and he's still living this second life over in Philadelphia. And one night, it's Thanksgiving, and everything changes for him again. Because he's over at his friend's house visiting, and they're all watching TV, and they're watching some movie. And randomly, a mailman appears on the TV screen. And suddenly, boom, it hits Jim like a brick. He's hey, I think I used to be a mailman. Not only that, some fuzzy memories start coming back to him, memories of him and his parents. It's weird, but he's still not really sure what's going on. Now, despite the fact that Jim has this whole new life, I guess some things just never change. Because at his very core, he is still clumsy as fuck. And about a month later, Jim has another fall and pow, he hits his head. Then a day after that, Jim's at work and he falls and bam, hits his head yet again. Here's the thing though. Him cracking his noggin must have finally knocked something straight, because the day after that, he wakes up and kaboom, it all hits him at once. All his memories start flooding back to him. His real name is Jim McDonald. He lives in upstate New York, and most importantly, he has a wife named Ann, a wife who hasn't seen him in 14 years. And so immediately he travels from Philadelphia over to New York, and he goes to his old house where he used to live years ago, thinking hopefully Ann still lives there. And ding dong, he rings the doorbell. And of course, boom, Ann answers, because she still lives there because she's been waiting for him all these years. And so finally, after 14 years apart, she sees that he's still alive. And I'm sure she's shocked and she's relieved at the same time. And regardless, after all that, they finally get to be together again. And from there, they smash? I actually don't know what they do from there. I don't know, I assume they smash. What do older people do? I don't know. It's a happy ending. That's all you need to know. And a huge shout out to Leonardo.ai for sponsoring this video. If you make videos and you want to make really badass art for those videos, like this or like this, like look at how cool that is. Sign up for Leonardo.ai. So this guy stole a dead body and Gene Hackman watched him get arrested for it. This story is wild. So it all starts with this guy, Graham. And Graham is a rock country musician living in California, and he's not super famous, but he influenced some very famous bands. He influenced the Rolling Stones, he influenced the Eagles, but Graham has a problem. He really loves drugs, like the hard stuff. Bro is always high on something. And one day in 1973, he and some friends take a little trip out to Joshua Tree. Joshua Tree is a desert in California where hippies like to go and do drugs. So he and some friends end up in this hotel around Joshua Tree. Now, one of his friends is supposed to be in charge of making sure Graham doesn't overdo it with all the drugs he takes. This guy, Michael Martin. And Michael Martin is Graham's friend and his assistant. However, at one point, Michael Martin leaves the hotel to go pick up some Zaza, and he leaves Graham there alone with two ladies. And so Graham is there and he starts trying to talk his lady friends into drinking tequila with him. And the two ladies are like, nah. And so Graham's like, cool, more tequila for me. And he drinks a ton. Then, once he's all wasted, he decides it'll be a good idea to do some morphine. So then he does a ton of that. Then, as you can imagine, I guess he does too much, and suddenly, boom, Graham becomes unresponsive. And the ladies are like freaking out, like, oh my God, he just OD'd. Then one of the ladies is like, I know what to do. And she gets some ice, because, you know, hotels always have ice. So she gets some ice cubes, pulls down Graham's pants, and shoves the cubes directly up Graham's butt. Like, she actually gives him an ice cube suppository. And surprisingly, this works. It like jolts him awake and he gets up and he's like walking around the room and now he suddenly seems fine. However, shortly after he sits down, he falls back asleep and he eventually stops breathing. And again, the ladies are freaking out and they don't know what to do, so they call an ambulance. But unfortunately, it's too late and Graham has overdosed and he doesn't make it. And as crazy as that is, it's not nearly as crazy as the attempt to steal his body. So 2 months before this, Graham just happened to be attending a funeral. And he's there with this guy, Kaufman. Kaufman is Graham's tour manager. And at some point during this funeral, Graham turns to Kaufman and he says, man, when I die, just spread my ashes out in Joshua Tree. And Kaufman hears this and he's like, all right. And so fast forward 2 months, and now Graham has died. And Kaufman, I guess, he wants to be a real one and grant Graham his last wish. Scatter his ashes in Joshua Tree. And so Kaufman calls the local coroner's office, and he asks where Graham's body is. And they inform him that Graham's body is actually about to be flown from California all the way back to Louisiana so he can be buried there, where some of his family lives. And Kaufman can't let that happen. So he comes up with a plan to steal Graham's body and take it back to Joshua Tree. First, he contacts Michael Martin and gets him involved in this scheme. Then,
tacos from out of the sky. Tacos, no need to ask why. Just open your mouth and close your eyes. It's raining tacos. It's raining tacos out in the street. Tacos, all you can eat. Lettuce and shells, cheese and meat. It's raining tacos. Yum, 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 yummity yum. It's like a dream. Yum, 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 yummity yum. Bring your sour cream.
Shell, meat, lettuce, cheese. Shell, meat, lettuce, cheese. Shell, meat, cheese, 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 cheese.
It's raining tacos. Raining tacos. Raining tacos.
Lettuce. Cheese. Shell.
It's raining tacos.
The two dress up like they work at a funeral home. Then,
It's raining tacos from out of the sky. Tacos, no need to ask why. Just open your mouth.
they decide they need a hearse to pull this off. And by sheer coincidence, one of
It's raining tacos. Raining tacos.
the women Graham was with in the hotel room when he died just so happens to own a hearse. And it's a piece of shit and it's all run down and it has no license plates, but it's a hearse. So they borrow it. Then they decide that they don't like the way they look in their formal funeral home outfits and they change into new outfits, dressing up like cowboys for some reason. And then they get really drunk so that they have the confidence to commit the crime that they're about to commit. And so Kaufman and Michael Martin, dressed like cowboys, they start driving this hearse to the Los Angeles airport to intercept Graham's body and stop it from being shipped to Louisiana. So they get there, and they're at the airport, and they pull up to the loading dock, which is basically just a big airplane hangar. And there's a lot of cargo there, including the casket with Graham's body in it. And then Kaufman uses his manager charm to convince the dock manager that they're there to pick up Graham's casket and body and transport it over to a different airport. And I guess the dock manager's like, "Hi." And Kaufman signs some paperwork and they're all ready to take this body and put it in their hearse. But then a police car pulls up and it's blocking the door of the hangar, which means it's blocking Kaufman and Michael Martin in. And instead of being all afraid, Kaufman is so drunk that he's just like, "Hey buddy, move your car." And the cop is like, "Sure, sorry." And then Kaufman's like, "And while you're here, can you help us lift this casket into the car?" And the cop's like, "Sure." And so now the police officer is unknowingly helping them commit this crime. And so they all load the casket into the back of the hearse, and they go to drive away, and Michael Martin is still really drunk, and kaboom, he crashes into the door of the hangar. And from there, the cop doesn't do anything, he just lets them drive away. And the 70s were a wild time. But anyway, then Kaufman and Michael Martin drive this hearse from the airport all the way out to Joshua Tree. Now, what Graham specifically wanted was to be cremated and have his ashes scattered across the desert. But he's not exactly cremated. So Kaufman and Michael Martin, they unload the casket and they douche it with 5 gallons of gasoline and they set it on fire. And there, they watch it burn for a bit, and it's not exactly scattering his ashes across the desert, but it's the best they can do. Then, they flee the area, and they start driving back to Los Angeles. But here's the thing, they're both still pretty drunk. And along the way, suddenly, boom, Michael Martin rear-ends a car. And this causes a multi-car accident. And so Highway Patrol sees this accident and they pull up and Michael Martin opens the door to the hearse and a bunch of beer cans fall out. And so the Highway Patrol is like, "Yep, these guys are drunk." And they arrest them and they put them in handcuffs. And so Kaufman and Michael Martin are standing there waiting in handcuffs while the Highway Patrol goes to check on other people involved in the accident. And that is when Kaufman and Michael Martin are like, "Fuck all this," and they jump in the hearse and they speed away. Here's the thing though, remember the hearse was a rundown piece of shit with no license plates. So the Highway Patrol didn't get their plates and couldn't identify them. So Kaufman and Michael Martin successfully get away. Until 5 days go by and Kaufman and Michael Martin still haven't been caught. And the police now know Graham's body was stolen from the airport and they've been investigating and they've pretty much figured out it was Kaufman and Michael Martin who did it. Meanwhile, Kaufman, for some reason, he decides to rent out his house for people or like movie studios to film in. And a studio actually rents out his place, and they're in the middle of filming the movie Night Moves there. And it's a movie starring a young Gene Hackman. And in the middle of that shoot, boom, police bust into Kaufman's house. And Gene Hackman just happens to be standing there watching, shocked, as bam, they arrest Kaufman. Here's a picture of him in real life. Then the next day, Michael Martin surrenders himself to police, and I unfortunately couldn't find any pictures of him online. But here's the crazy thing though. Because it's the 1970s, I guess there are no laws in place regarding stealing a dead body. So, like, none of this was technically illegal, and police and prosecutors don't exactly know what to charge these guys with. So they get charged with theft of the casket, not of the body, because a human body in this time doesn't have any, like, monetary value. So they get charged with the theft of the casket. And Kaufman and Michael Martin are each ordered to pay a fine of $1,000 total. So after all of that, they only had to pay like $1,000 fine and no jail time, and they just got away free. The 70s were insane. So this famous Hollywood lawyer stole millions of dollars. Now the guy's name is Tom, and Tom is 60 when this story starts, and he's a hotshot attorney living in Los Angeles, and Tom, he's kind of famous. One of the lawyers in the Aaron Brockovich movie is based off of him, or was inspired by him, or something like that. But you get the point. He's well known in the business. But one day in 1999, his whole life changes, because he meets this waitress, Erica. And Tom thinks Erica is fine, and they start dating, and they fall in love, and even though she's 27 years old and he's 60, they get married. And soon she moves into his multi-million-dollar mansion to live with him and all his money. And so now Tom has everything he's ever wanted. He's a celebrity lawyer with a young wife making millions of dollars. Here's the thing about Tom though. Whatever money he's making from practicing law, it doesn't seem to be enough for him. Because at some point, he starts stealing from his own clients. Like he'll win a big settlement for them and he'll just like steal some of it and keep it for himself. And of course, his clients notice and they get all mad and they sue him. In fact, multiple clients have sued him over the years. But because he's this hotshot celebrity attorney, he's really good at keeping his record clean. He's apparently friends with all these people in power, like judges, bar officials, politicians, and he knows exactly how to bribe them, like throwing parties and sending gifts and sending money and stuff. And so, even though he gets a lot of complaints filed against him, Tom's record with the California State Bar remains perfect, and his reputation stays good, and he's able to keep getting more and more clients and keep this scam going. But anyway, now that Tom has been scamming his clients and he has all this stolen money, what is he gonna do with it? Well, it turns out his young wife Erica really wants to be a pop star. And jumping into a pop career costs a lot of money. So she needs money. Money to record, money for music videos and outfits and productions and stuff. And she's also just the kind of person who's into flashy, expensive shit. So in order to fund all of this, Tom feels like he's gotta make even more money. And this is where it all gets really diabolical. Okay, close your eyes and imagine this. Imagine you sue someone and you win a $10 million settlement, and your lawyer collects the money for you. And the people you sued, they don't pay it all at once. They pay you over time in installments. And your lawyer starts stealing a portion of the money that you won. Now, eventually, at some point, you're gonna come asking him, hey, where's the rest of the money I won? And your lawyer is gonna have to pay you something. So, where does he get the money to pay you back? Well, he steals it from his other clients' winnings. He basically turns it into one big Ponzi scheme, and he's scamming each client to pay off the previous client. And that is exactly what Tom does. And so, how does he keep getting away with it? Well, he must be paying off the right people, because he comes under investigation for this, but like nothing gets done about it. So he keeps working and he keeps winning massive cases and he keeps stiffing his clients out of millions of dollars. And then he'll like funnel that money that he stole to fund his and Erica's lifestyle. And he's like putting millions and millions into her entertainment company that she now has, and into her pop star career, into her music videos, her backup dancers, her travel, her clothes, all of that. In fact, here's a music video she did with Flo Rida, which I'm sure he got paid really well for. Okay, but then this whole thing gets even crazier. In 2015, Erica gets cast on a reality TV show, The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which is a very popular show. And of course she says yes to this opportunity because she hopes it'll promote her and her music career. And to be fair to Erica, she seems to have the right kind of personality to do well on a show like that.
I say important shit. You say too much boring shit.
Not only that, but Tom is a rich celebrity lawyer, so sometimes he'll appear on the show too. And the two of them, they like talk about how much her music videos cost to produce.
You know that video? That was an expensive video.
It was worth it.
And by the way, just to like really flex all their wealth, Erica's big breakout song with her pop music is called It's Expensive to Be Me.
It's expensive to be me.
Anyway, so now they're on TV and they got this big new spotlight on them and they're getting all this attention. But even so, it still seems like no one is able to bust Tom for this Ponzi scheme he's got going on. In fact, in 2018, he wins an award, Lawyer of the Decade, for outstanding leadership and his dedication to the legal profession. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, but then, that same year, something pretty crazy happens. There's a horrible plane crash in the Pacific Ocean, and all 189 people on board, unfortunately, they don't make it. And all the passengers on board, their families, they want to file a big lawsuit against Boeing, the company that made the aircraft. And who do they hire to represent them in this lawsuit? The hottest hotshot celebrity lawyer in town who sometimes appears on reality TV, Tom. And so Tom takes them on as clients and he negotiates on their behalf. And they end up getting a settlement of $12.5 million from Boeing. And so Boeing pays the money to Tom and Tom pays the victims what they're owed. But no, he doesn't actually pay the victims what they're owed. He gives them some of the winnings, but he also takes more than $3 million for himself to pay off his credit card bills and stuff like that. He also pays off some of the settlements of previous clients that he scammed. Because remember, this is all one big Ponzi scheme. And so I assume at some point these victims noticed that they didn't get all their money. And they're hitting him up like, why haven't we been paid the full amount, Tom? Where's the rest of our money, Tom? And Tom is probably coming up with bullshit excuses like, oh, it's 2 more weeks, I promise. But whatever. In reality, Tom doesn't give a damn. Because over the past 40 years of his legal career, he's had over 200 ethics complaints to the State Bar of California with 0 consequences. This dude is basically untouchable. Until at some point, the money coming in just isn't catching up with all the money he now owes to people. So his big Ponzi scheme starts to fall apart. And pretty quickly, his firm runs out of money and begins to go into large amounts of debt. I'm talking tens of millions of dollars in debt. And suddenly, boom, his firm has to file bankruptcy. Then in 2020, as he's slowly going broke, boom, Erica suddenly files for divorce. Shocker. A month later, boom, both Tom and Erica get hit with a giant lawsuit by the relatives of the plane crash victims. Then, boom, Tom gets disbarred from practicing law in California. And then, of course, bam, he finally gets arrested. And I don't have a mugshot, but here's what he looks like in real life. And he ultimately gets sentenced to 7 years in prison, and he loses his lawsuit and has to pay the families of the plane crash $2.3 million. While Erica actually gets no prison time, as she wasn't part of his law firm, so I guess she wasn't directly involved in his Ponzi scheme. So this is a dog, and this dog is more famous than you, or me. So how did Robert Downey Jr. go from broke and homeless into one of the biggest movie stars in the world? Now, Robert is a kid when this story started. He gets into 12-step programs and long-term therapy, and it's really hard for him, but he does it. And now, at 38 years old, for the first time since he was a kid, Robert is finally clean. This is great for him. Here's the thing though. Robert is sober now, but he was such a mess for such a long time that he still has a hard time getting people to believe in him, including movie studios, because to them, he is still unemployable. However, not everyone has written him completely off. This guy still believes in him. Actor, director, producer, Jon Favreau. And in 2006, Jon just happens to be casting for a new movie he's directing called Iron Man. And when Jon sees Robert audition on camera, he's like, that's our guy. That is Tony Stark. However, the suits at the studio are like, no way, bro. They don't want to take the risk on Robert Downey Jr., the drug addict, the loose cannon. I mean, the entire future of Marvel Studios is riding on the success of this Iron Man movie. This is a $140 million production. What if he relapses? It could tank the whole MCU that they have planned. And so they tell Jon, bro, we can't risk the entire future of Marvel Studios on an addict. But Jon, he's not gonna let it go. He believes in Robert completely. And so he keeps working to convince the studio heads that Robert is their guy. He is Tony Stark. Only he can play this role. And to prove that Robert is dedicated to this job, he agrees to take only a tiny paycheck for it, a fraction of what he should make. And then they agree. And so, boom, he gets cast as Tony Stark in Iron Man.
Truth is, I am Iron Man.
And you know the rest. In 2008, the movie premieres, and boom, it blows the hell up, earning $500 million at the box office. And it's the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which becomes the highest grossing movie franchise of all time, making the decision to cast Robert Downey Jr. one of the greatest and most lucrative casting decisions in movie history. You know that show Jeopardy? So this two-time Jeopardy champion ends up murdering his own wife. So the guy's name is Curry, and Curry's 32, he's a nuclear engineer, and he's super smart, like a genius. He's apparently a member of Mensa, and he's also the kind of guy who makes sure to let everyone know how smart he is. And one time, he and his big brain, they go on Jeopardy, and he wins a bunch of money. He actually wins the show twice, and he gets like $60,000, which is great money, especially in the 80s. But then, one day in 1989, Curry's whole life changes, because he meets this woman. Her name's Linda. Linda's 45, she's a little older than Curry, and she works with him, and she thinks he is fine. And so they hit it off, and they start dating, and eventually they start smashing. A few years later, in 1992, they end up getting married. And Linda has never been happier. She's super in love with Curry and his big brain. Here's the thing though. I guess Curry doesn't feel the same way about her, because for some reason, about a month into their marriage, his behavior starts to get a little suspicious. Like he starts demanding that everything be put in his name, the mortgage, life insurance, 401k. Not only that, he starts insisting that he take out a $1 million life insurance policy on Linda. And when Linda is like, okay, but are we gonna take $1 million life insurance policy out on you as well? Curry's like, nah. But anyway, so Linda agrees to this. Because remember, she's super like, nah. But anyway, so Linda agrees to this. Because remember, she's super in love with Curry, and she'll do anything to make him happy. But then, things get even weirder. One day, Linda's at home and the phone rings, and she picks it up, and there's a woman on the other end who's looking for Curry. And this woman is wondering why he hasn't paid his child support. And Linda's like, Curry has a kid? But she had no idea he had a kid from a previous marriage that he's supposed to be paying for and isn't. Not only that, he had been married twice before and he never told her. So this marriage is off to a good start. Regardless, none of these lies really matter to Linda because she's still way into him for some weird reason. And so at some point around 1993, Curry's weird ass decides, okay, I'm tired of this marriage. I got the life insurance policy all set up, and now it's time to unalive her. Why don't these people ever just get a divorce? Anyway, and so he gets right to work on this plan. And he starts making all these fancy homemade salad dressings because I guess Linda really loves salad. So he makes these salad dressings for her and he'll put small amounts of nicotine in them, which over time, the nicotine builds up in her system and starts making her sick. And eventually, Linda starts getting gastrointestinal problems from this, and she gets really sick. And she checks herself into a hospital, she's so sick. But the doctors don't really know what's going on or what's wrong with her. Then, while she's in the hospital, one night, while she's asleep, someone sneaks in and tampers with her IV bag. And when a nurse comes in to check on her, she sees that there's a puncture in the tubing for the bag, and the hospital calls the police. And so police come out and they investigate and they talk to Linda and they ask her if she knows if someone has been trying to poison her. And the only person Linda can think of is Curry, her husband. But unfortunately, before police can launch a proper investigation into all this, Linda is released from the hospital and she goes right back home to live with him again, because again, she still loves him so much. Shortly after that, sure enough, Linda starts getting sick again. She's dehydrated, she's vomiting, she can't eat. And so Curry, he takes her to the hospital again. It's a different hospital this time. I guess he doesn't want to raise suspicion. But then, while she's in this hospital, it happens again. One night, while she's asleep, someone sneaks in and tampers with her IV bag. Luckily, the hospital staff catches it this time, and they bar anyone else from entering the room unaccompanied. And so eventually, Linda recovers and she goes back home to live with Curry. She still has no idea he's behind all this. Now at this point, Curry realizes his plan isn't working. Adding small amounts of nicotine to Linda's salad dressings, it's not doing enough. It isn't unaliving her fast enough. And so he and his big brain, they come up with a new plan to unalive Linda. And this time, it'll be as quickly as possible. First, he slips her a bunch of sleeping pills to knock her out. Then, after she's passed out, he takes a syringe and he fills it full of nicotine, and bam, he injects her with it. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but pure nicotine is apparently fatal, and it doesn't take that much to unalive someone. A syringe full will definitely do it. And so this injection of nicotine that Curry gives her, unfortunately, it ends her life. And so then, obviously, police get involved and they investigate the death and they have a toxicology report done. And the toxicology report shows that there's a lot of nicotine in her system. But I guess they don't investigate further because they don't have any evidence against anyone specifically. I actually don't really know why they don't investigate further. I just know they don't. Regardless, they eventually stop and the case goes cold. Meanwhile, Curry, he gets a fat paycheck. Remember how he took out that $1 million life insurance policy on Linda? Well, he ends up having to split it with Linda's sister, but still, he takes home over $400,000. So he's living good. Then he eventually moves from California all the way over to Kansas, and he starts a new life, and he gets a job as a building code inspector, and he gets married all over again, and he basically just continues on, like he's never gonna get caught, and maybe he never will. Maybe he really is that smart. Until years go by. And one day in 2002, this sergeant from the local sheriff's office, she starts looking into cold cases, and she stumbles upon the case of Linda's death. And she's like, all right, I'll take a look at this. And she starts re-examining all the evidence, and she immediately zeroes in on the victim's husband at the time, Curry. I mean, he was with her in the hospital when the IV bags were tampered with, and Linda had previously told police that he was the only one who could have poisoned her, so bro is looking really suspicious right now. And so this sergeant spends a really long time looking into this, going over old files, re-interviewing old witnesses, everything she can do. Then, 4 years later, she finally has enough evidence to take all this to the district attorney. Then the district attorney gets the toxicology report that was initially done on Linda further analyzed, a more modern analysis, because like 15 years have gone by since Linda was murdered, and toxicology analysis has greatly improved. And this new analysis shows that Linda had 50 to 100 times more nicotine in her blood than a regular smoker would have. 50 to 100 times. And Linda didn't even smoke. And so it's now confirmed that Linda died from nicotine poisoning, aka she was murdered. So with all this new evidence backing her up, the sergeant, who was originally working on the cold case, she travels over to Kansas and she brings Curry in for questioning. And she grills him and she gets him to confirm that he was home alone with Linda the night of her death, meaning he's the only one who could have injected her with nicotine. And so, bam, Curry's arrested. Here's his mugshot. And so then Curry goes to trial, and finally, 20 years after Linda's death, he's found guilty, and he's sentenced to life in prison. Maybe he wasn't as smart as he thought. So this YouTuber is in big trouble. He allegedly tried to unalive a cop. Now the guy's name is Eric, and Eric's an influencer living in New York, and he's very popular on YouTube. Almost 3 million followers. And he does videos where he tours luxury homes, he does walkthroughs, and these aren't just pretty nice houses. Some of these are $500 million mansions. And so this is a really good gig for him, because over time his channel has been growing and he's been getting really successful. Here he is with his YouTube play button after hitting 1 million subscribers. In fact, he's been getting so popular that on his channel he does a workout video with Chris Hemsworth. Pretty cool. Not to mention he's huge on TikTok, 1.3 million followers, and Instagram with almost 1 million followers. So clearly bro found a decent niche for himself and he's doing really well. Until one day, Eric screws it all up. Earlier this year, he puts out a video on YouTube, and in it, he announces that he's been sober from alcohol for several years.
1,444 days sober from alcohol today.
And good for him for getting his life together. But then, just a few months later, he apparently falls off the wagon, because he's driving his Jeep around town one day, and police pull him over, and they find that old Eric is anything but sober. And one news source says he was drunk driving, another news source says he was driving while high on Zaza, so it's likely one of those two things. Regardless, he was allegedly operating a vehicle while intoxicated on something, and so bam, they arrest him. Now, this has nothing to do with him attacking a cop, this is just him falling off the wagon. We'll get to the thing about him attacking a cop. Anyway, so soon after this, he gets out of jail on bond. And he posts about his arrest 1,000 times on his Twitter. I guess he's upset about it. He claims that police put the cuffs on him too tight. And you can actually see in this picture here he posted, he's got a bruise on his wrist there. And he says he's suing the police for violating his constitutional rights. Okay, bro. But then, a few days later, he screws up again. And this time it's much worse. Because he's driving around New Hampshire for some reason, and he's speeding. He's doing around 60 miles an hour in a 35. And suddenly, boom, he flies right by a police officer. And the cop's like, oh, hell no. And he pulls out behind Eric, and boo, he turns on his lights. And a bystander actually got this footage of the cop following him. So this is actual footage. Now, most people in this situation would immediately pull over, oh man, I got caught speeding, and then, you pay your ticket and you move on with your life. But that's not what Eric does. Instead, Eric's like, f*** the police, and he just keeps on driving. So this cop is following him for a while, and finally Eric's like, alright, and he pulls over. So then the police officer pulls up and he orders Eric to get out of the vehicle. Then I guess Eric changes his mind and he's like, fuck the police again, and he drives away again. So now the officer's gotta get back in his car and chase him, hoping he'll finally give up and pull over. About 8 miles later, Eric finally does pull over again. But he pulls over to the oncoming lane for some reason. So the officer pulls up behind him and he gets out of his car to approach Eric's Jeep. Then, allegedly, for some reason, we still don't know why, but Eric throws the Jeep in reverse and floors it and pow, hits the cop with his vehicle. And the officer flies like 20 to 40 feet before boom, he lands on the ground. And Eric speeds away. And pretty quickly, the officer calls for backup. And now there are multiple cops chasing Eric, trying to catch him. And this chase goes on for 28 miles. And eventually, police throw down some of those spike strips, and Eric runs over them, and pow, his tires blow out. And just like that, the chase is over because his Jeep is fucked. And you can actually see a picture of it here with all the tires flat. And so, bam, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot.
A Bartlett police officer is out of the hospital after getting hit during that chase with a popular YouTuber accused of trying to kill him.
Oh, but the story gets even crazier. Because Eric gets charged with, among other things, attempted murder of a police officer, which is a huge deal. And the police officer survived, by the way. I think one of his legs ended up being injured, but other than that, he's alive. Anyway, 3 days later, Eric has an arraignment hearing. And at this hearing, he's talking to the judge, and he allegedly starts telling the judge all kinds of crazy shit. He tells him that he's a popular YouTuber, that he's a public figure. He encourages the judge to look him up and look at his online following because he has millions of followers. Like, I'm not sure that's gonna help his case. He apparently also tells the judge that this is all one big misunderstanding, that he's Eric, but that the guy they're looking for is apparently a different guy named Eric. While he's a popular YouTuber, the other Eric isn't, I guess. And he lives in New York, while the real Eric they're looking for lives in another state. I don't know, like his excuses are weird and confusing, so forgive me if I'm getting any of them wrong. But at one point, he holds up documents and claims that they've been falsified.
I have everything right here and it's all been falsified.
Then he starts insinuating that the police are all out to get him and that this is all part of some sort of police sting operation. Then he brings up his sobriety.
I've been sober from alcohol for 1,558 days, so to press me on a DUI, I'm a public figure.
Then his parents show up to the hearing and he starts to break down a little.
Mom, thank God, look at me!
Eric, they're here to help you.
I mean, clearly, the whole thing is just a circus. Now, at this point, someone, I'm not sure if it was a judge or an attorney, they bring up his mental competency. Because nothing he's saying is making any sense, and his behavior's been erratic, and he's acting a bit odd. And for some reason, bringing up his mental competency sets him off.
If anyone dares try to test my mental competence, I will eviscerate every single person with my intelligence right now. And that's not being egotistical.
I will eviscerate every single person with my intelligence. Look at fucking Rick Sanchez over here. Now, why is Eric crashing out so hard? Like, why is he acting this way? Well, all we have right now are theories. And on the internet, among his fandom, this is the leading theory. A while back, on his Instagram, he was posting some things like this. So you can see in this picture, he's got a pill in his mouth and a prescription bottle in his hand with the caption, "Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry tried to gaslight me that I need medication too, when all you need is some discipline of your emotional state." So what is that bottle of meds in his hand? Well, the internet is saying that it's olanzapine. Now, I can't confirm that it's olanzapine, like I've zoomed in on the label, and you can compare it to an actual image of a bottle of olanzapine. Like, it looks similar to me, but I don't know. That's just what everyone on the internet is saying. Now, why that matters is olanzapine is an antipsychotic used to treat the symptoms of schizophrenia. And so the leading theory among his fandom is that he had been prescribed antipsychotics for symptoms of schizophrenia, and that he's recently decided that he's gonna stop taking them and go all natural, because I guess he doesn't trust the big pharmaceutical companies. And that him quitting his meds caused him to fall off the wagon and act out in all kinds of ways, like running over a cop, for instance. But again, this is just a theory. Regardless, he hasn't been to trial yet, so all of these accusations are
alleged.
However, these are some very serious charges, so I think his days of being a YouTube star, they might be over. If you remember the movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you probably remember this tree scene. Well, the child actor playing this bush here actually ends up murdering someone. It's crazy. Now, his name is Ryan. He's 9, he's from Squamish, British Columbia, and Ryan is young, but he already knows he wants to be an actor. So one day, he auditions for a commercial, and boom, he gets the part. So he keeps going. And eventually he gets a small role in a TV movie. And soon he's in other movies and TV shows, and people are like, "You're going places, kid." And a few years later, when he's around 12 years old, he lands a small role in the movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid. He's the kid who plays the Bush in the school play. And it's a small role in a big movie, but this is a huge deal for him. And so he just keeps acting, small roles here and there, and eventually, a couple years later, he gets a lead role in a movie.
Hi, I'm Ryan Grantham, and I'm playing the role of Redwood.
And so it feels like his acting career is finally getting traction. He gets a small role on a show called Falling Skies, and on another show called iZombie. Then he gets cast in 2 episodes of Supernatural. 4 years after that, he's cast in an episode of Riverdale.
He told the police he did it, to protect me, but it wasn't him.
And that's all great for Ryan, but here's the thing about all this acting he's doing. He's working, he's getting roles here and there, some promising stuff, but he's not landing A-list parts like he wants. Like, nothing is making him this famous movie star, and this really starts to weigh on Ryan. And soon enough, he's really down about it. Like, really down. Like, he's battling with depression, and it just sucks for him. And by the way, this is a really common thing with actors. They see making it as a big Hollywood star as the very definition of success, as opposed to just being a working actor who gets a lot of smaller roles here and there. And so they, like Ryan, when they don't make it big time like Timothée Chalamet or whoever, they'll start to see themselves as a failure, instead of seeing themselves as someone who is working a job doing something they really love, which a lot of people don't have the privilege of getting to do. Like, I personally think it's cool he was in Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Falling Skies and Riverdale. Like, that's a cool little resume to me, especially at 21 years old. Like, that sounds like success to me, but I guess it doesn't to Ryan. So, for whatever reason, Ryan doesn't tell anyone. He keeps it to himself and acts as if everything is okay. And around this time, he's going to college. And in college, he's having a really hard time there too. And he's bummed out and he's isolating himself, and he starts having a lot of really dark thoughts. And apparently, to combat all this, he gets really into alcohol and Zaza. Until, as things keep getting worse for Ryan, he starts spending more and more time online, specifically on the dark web, which can be a really messed up place. And I guess he gets really into watching these like really violent videos. A lot of these videos are apparently of people being executed. Like, that's what he's consuming all day. And eventually Ryan gets into such a bad mental state, he just stops going to class. And all of this is putting him in a headspace where he wants to unalive himself. And then he starts thinking about what it might feel like to unalive someone else. Like I said, he's having a lot of really dark thoughts. And at some point in all this, he starts to come up with this plan. A plan to unalive someone. But the person he wants to take out isn't some rival classmate who works at Burger King or something. Ryan wants to unalive the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Specifically, he plans to drive to where the Prime Minister lives, open fire on the place, and set it ablaze. Why he specifically chooses Trudeau as a target is actually unclear. Ryan doesn't seem like a very political guy, but apparently for some reason he just really hates Trudeau. Anyway, so he thinks through this plan, and yeah, he's gonna do it. And then goes to the store and he buys himself a new rifle. Here's the thing though, when it comes to this plan, Ryan can't stop thinking about his mom, who we'll just call Mom. And Mom is a sweet woman who he still lives with, and she has always supported his acting dreams. And Ryan, he keeps thinking that if he were to unalive the Prime Minister, then his name would be all over the news and his mom would know that her son is a killer and it would destroy her. And Ryan doesn't want to destroy her, he doesn't want her to have to face that shame. So he decides that the merciful thing to do would be to unalive her first, so that she never finds out. Now Mom, she frequently plays the piano, and when she does, she's totally absorbed in the music and the playing, and Ryan has this thing where he'll like rehearse the hit, he'll sneak up behind her while she's playing, and he'll point his pew-pew at the back of her head, and he'll mimic the shooting, and she's completely oblivious to what's going on. But anyway, then, the big day finally comes, and it's go time. And so Mom is at the piano and she's playing away, and that's when Ryan grabs his rifle and he sneaks up behind her and he points it at her head and he pulls the trigger. Blam! And Mom falls to the floor and she's unalived. Then, for whatever reason, Ryan gets his GoPro and he turns it on and he records himself. He's like, hey, I just murdered my mom, and then he turns the camera to show the body. And as crazy as all this is a lot for Ryan to process, and he needs to chill. So he goes out and buys some beer and some Zaza. And then he comes back home and he hangs out and he watches Netflix for a couple of hours, while Mom's body is still there, lying on the floor. And before he goes to sleep, he throws a sheet over his mom to cover her up. Now, in the morning, he's ready to carry out the second part of his plan: take out Justin Trudeau. So he packs up his car with 3 pew-pews, a ton of ammunition, a bunch of Molotov cocktails he made, camping supplies, and a printed Google map with directions to Trudeau's house. Then he takes off and he drives for a few hours, for about 150 miles. And on this drive, he starts really thinking hard about what he's about to do. Like, is he really gonna drive all the way across Canada to unalive the Prime Minister? Because I look at that map, that's a really long drive. It's about 45 hours. So Ryan, he starts to change his mind, and he starts thinking of other options he could do. Like, maybe I'll just go back to my college and unalive a bunch of people there, or maybe I'll go to the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver and unalive a bunch of people there. And so, for whatever reason, he suddenly decides to turn his car around and he starts driving back. Now, here's where things get even more weird, because on this drive, I guess he thinks about it more and more. Does he really want to unalive people at his school or at the bridge in Vancouver? And I guess the answer is no, because instead of doing that, he drives to Vancouver, right to the police station, and he walks up to an officer who's sitting in a parked car, and he's like, "Hi, I unalived my mom." Now, it isn't clear exactly why Ryan changed his mind suddenly. Like, he seems to be mentally just all over the place. Like, he wants to unalive himself, then he suddenly has this plan to unalive Trudeau, but then he has to unalive his mom first, and then he changes his mind, decides to hit up his school and the bridge. If this plan feels scattered to you, it's because it is. Regardless, eventually, bam, police arrest him. And I don't have a mugshot, but he's an actor, so here's his headshot. And he ultimately pleads guilty to second-degree murder, and he's sentenced to life in prison. So this guy, let's